I'm a prisoner in my own home! At least that's what it feels like now that we're in quarantine. Hello, everybody! It is Wednesday, my dudes. Today we're going to be reading a short psychological study done called the Stanford Prison Experiment. Essentially, a guy took a bunch of regular people and said, half of you are going to be prisoners, half of you are going to be guards. Let's see what you guys do to each other. It ends up kind of being like a creepypasta, actually. The point of reading that article, though, is to illustrate how and to review how people structure expository essays. So, once again, we have a couple of different kinds of organizational structures that authors use. We have problem solution, cause and effect, compare and contrast, and sequential or chronological order. Now, authors will use those structures to make their writing more organized. And the way that you can identify how an author organized their writing is by identifying the subheadings that they use, by taking a look at some of the key words that they might have in there, and also just reading what kind of information they have in each of the sections under the headings and subheadings in their article. Once you read through an article, you can sort of determine, okay, what structure was used with this article? Now, why do we care other than just that different structures can look kind of nice and interesting? Well, the reason why we care is because when we know the structure that an article has used, it allows us to identify the key points of that article more quickly. It also helps us identify what is the author trying to emphasize here in this article. For example, if they're using problem solution format, then odds are the author is going to be emphasizing what the solution is that we should be focusing on. If an author uses compare and contrast, then they want to emphasize the differences and similarities between two different things. If they're using chronological or sequential order, they want to emphasize the sort of journey that something has taken, the change from beginning to end that they saw in a certain topic. Go ahead and pause and answer the questions that are associated with the video first. After this, though, I'm going to start reading through what's known as the Stanford Prison Experiment. You're going to answer some questions about each of the sections. You're going to see if you can identify what kind of structure did the author use in this article. And finally, you're going to answer why. Why did the author use that kind of structure? Anyway, I will see you in just one moment. Quesadilla. So let's get into this then, shall we? I'm going to read through and let you know when to pause after each of these sections to go back into the lesson form to answer some of the comprehension questions I have prepared for you. Simply Psychology Stanford Prison Experiment by Saul MacLeod. Purpose of the study. Zimbardo and his colleagues, 1973, were interested in finding out whether the brutality reported among guards in American prisons was due to the sadistic personalities of the guards, i.e. dispositional, or had more to do with the prison environment, i.e. situational. For example, prisoner and guards may have personalities which make conflict inevitable, with prisoners lacking respect for law and order and guards being domineering and aggressive. Alternatively, prisoners and guards may behave in a hostile manner due to the rigid power structure of the social environment in prisons. Zimbardo predicted the situation made people act the way they do rather than their disposition or personality. Go ahead and pause here and answer the question about the purpose of the study section. All right, next, procedure. To study the roles people play in prison situations, Zimbardo converted a basement of the Stanford University Psychology Building into a mock prison. He had advertised asking for volunteers to participate in a study of the psychological effects of prison life. The 75 applicants who answered the ad were given diagnostic interviews and personality tests to eliminate candidates with psychological problems, medical disabilities, or a history of crime or drug abuse. 24 men judged to be the most physically and mentally stable, the most mature, and the least involved in antisocial behaviors were chosen to participate. The participants did not know each other prior to the study and were paid $15 per day to take part in the experiment. Participants were randomly assigned to either the role of prisoner or guard in a simulated prison environment. There were 2 reserves and 1 dropped out, finally leaving 10 prisoners and 11 guards. Prisoners were treated like every other criminal, being arrested at their own homes without warning and taken to the local police station. They were fingerprinted, photographed, and booked. Then they were blindfolded and driven to the psychology department of Stanford University, where Zimbardo had the basement set out as a prison, with barred doors and windows, bare walls, and small cells. Here the de-individuation process began. When the prisoners arrived at the prison, they were stripped naked, deloused, had all their personal possessions removed and locked away, and were given prison clothes and bedding. They were issued a uniform and referred to by their number only. Their clothes comprised a smock with their numbers written on it, but no underclothes. They also had a tiny nylon cap to cover their hair, and a locked chain around one ankle. All guards were dressed in identical uniforms of khaki, and they carried a whistle around their neck and a billy club borrowed from the police. Guards also wore special sunglasses to make eye contact with prisoners impossible. The 3 guards worked shifts of 8 hours each. The other guards remained on call. Guards were instructed to do whatever they thought was necessary to maintain law and order in the prison and to command the respect of the prisoners. No physical violence was permitted. Zimbardo observed the behavior of the prisoners and guards as a researcher and also acted as a prison warden. Go ahead and pause here and answer the question for the procedure subheading. This is them setting up the experiment. All right, next section, findings. Within a very short time, both guards and prisoners were settling into their new roles, with the guards adopting theirs quickly and easily. Asserting authority. Within hours of beginning the experiment, some guards began to harass prisoners. At 2:30 a.m., prisoners were awakened from sleep by blasting whistles for the first of many counts. The count served as a way of familiarizing the prisoners with their numbers. More importantly, they provided a regular occasion for the guards to exercise control over the prisoners. The prisoners soon adopted prisoner-like behavior, too. They talked about prison issues a great deal of the time. They told tales on each other to the guards. They started taking the prison rules very seriously, as though they were there for the prisoners' benefit, and infringement would spell disaster for all of them. Some even began siding with the guards against prisoners who did not obey the rules. Physical punishment. The prisoners were taunted with insults and petty orders. They were given pointless and boring tasks to accomplish, and they were generally dehumanized. Push-ups were a common form of physical punishment imposed by the guards. One of the guards stepped on the prisoners' backs while they did push-ups, or made other prisoners sit on the backs of fellow prisoners doing their push-ups. Asserting independence. Because the first day passed without incident, the guards were surprised and totally unprepared for the rebellion, which broke out on the morning of the second day. During the second day of the experiment, the prisoners removed their stocking caps, ripped off their numbers, and barricaded themselves inside the cells by putting their beds against the door. The guards called in reinforcements. The 3 guards who were waiting on standby duty came in, and the night shift guards voluntarily remained on duty. Putting down the rebellion. The guards retaliated by using a fire extinguisher which shot a stream of skin-chilling carbon dioxide, and they forced the prisoners away from the doors. Next, the guards broke into each cell, stripped the prisoners naked, and took the beds out. The ringleaders of the prisoner rebellion were placed into solitary confinement. After this, the guards generally began to harass and intimidate the prisoners. Special privileges. One of the 3 cells was designated as a privilege cell. The 3 prisoners least involved in the rebellion were given special privileges. The guards gave them back their uniforms and beds and allowed them to wash their hair and brush their teeth. Privileged prisoners also got to eat special food in the presence of the other prisoners who had temporarily lost the privilege of eating. The effect was to break the solidarity among the prisoners. Consequences of the rebellion. Over the next few days, the relationships between the guards and the prisoners changed, with a change in one leading to a change in the other. Remember that the guards were firmly in control and the prisoners were totally dependent on them. As the prisoners became more dependent, the guards became more derisive towards them, and held the prisoners in contempt and let the prisoners know it. As the guards' contempt for them grew, the prisoners became more submissive. As the prisoners became more submissive, the guards became more aggressive and assertive. They demanded ever greater obedience from the prisoners. The prisoners were dependent on the guards for everything, so tried to find ways to please the guards, such as telling tales on fellow prisoners. Prisoner number 8612. Less than 36 hours into the experiment, prisoner number 8612 began suffering from acute emotional disturbance, disorganized thinking, uncontrollable crying, and rage. After a meeting with the guards where they told him he was weak, but offered him informant status, number 8612 returned to the other prisoners and said, "You can't leave. You can't quit." Soon, number 8612 began to act crazy, to scream, to curse, to go into a rage that seemed out of control. It wasn't until this point that the psychologists realized that they had to let him out. A visit from parents. The next day, the guards held a visiting hour for parents and friends. They were worried that when the parents saw the state of the jail, they might insist on taking their sons home. Guards watched the prisoners, had them clean and polish their cells, fed them a big dinner, and played music on the intercom. After the visit, rumors spread of a giant escape plan. Sorry, 1 second, lost my page. There we go. Rumors spread of a mass escape plan. Afraid that they would lose the prisoners, the guards and experimenters tried to enlist the help and facilities of the Palo Alto Police Department. The guards again escalated the level of harassment, forcing them to do menial, repetitive work such as cleaning toilets with their bare hands. Catholic priest. Zimbardo invited a Catholic priest who had been a prison chaplain to evaluate how realistic our prison situation was. Half of the prisoners introduced themselves by their number rather than name. The chaplain interviewed each prisoner individually. The priest told them the only way they would get out was with the help of a lawyer. Prisoner number 819. Eventually, while talking to the priest, number 819 broke down and began to cry hysterically, just as two previous released prisoners had. The psychologist removed the chain from his foot, the cap off his head, and told him to go and rest in a room that was adjacent to the prison yard. They told him that they would get some food and then take him to see a doctor. While this was going on, one of the guards lined up the other prisoners and had them chant aloud, "Prisoner number 819 is a bad prisoner. Because of what prisoner 819 did, my cell is a mess, Mr. Correctional Officer." The psychologists realized number 819 could hear the chanting and went back into the room where they found him sobbing uncontrollably. The psychologists tried to get him to agree to leave the experiment, but he said he could not leave because the others had labeled him a bad prisoner. Back to reality. At that point, Zimbardo said, "Listen, you're not number 819. You are his name, and my name is Dr. Zimbardo. I'm a psychologist, not a prison superintendent, and this is not a real prison. This is just an experiment. And those are students, not prisoners, just like you. Let's go." He stopped crying suddenly, looked up, and replied, "Okay, let's go," as if nothing had been wrong. The end of the experiment. Zimbardo, 1973, had intended that the experiment should run for 2 weeks, but on the 6th day it was terminated due to the emotional breakdowns of the prisoners and excessive aggression of the guards. Christina Maslach, a recent Stanford PhD brought in to conduct interviews with the guards and the prisoners, strongly objected when she saw the prisoners being abused by the guards. Filled with outrage, she said, "It's terrible what you're doing to these boys." Out of 50 or more outsiders who had seen our prison, she was the only one who ever questioned its morality. Zimbardo, 2008, later noted, "It wasn't until much later that I realized how far into my prison role I was at that point, that I was thinking like a prison superintendent rather than a research psychologist." Okay, at this point, go ahead and pause and answer the question of the findings section. And moving on to the conclusion section. Conclusion. Zimbardo's Stanford research experiment revealed how people will readily conform to the social roles they are expected to play, especially if the roles are as strongly stereotyped as those of the prisoner guards. The prison experiment environment was an important factor in creating the guards' brutal behavior. None of the participants who acted as guards showed sadistic tendencies before the study. Therefore, the findings support the situational explanation of behavior rather than the dispositional one. Zimbardo proposed that 2 processes can explain the prisoner's final submission. 1. De-individuation may explain the behavior of the participants, especially of the guards.
This is a state when you become so immersed in the norms of the group that you lose your sense of identity and personal responsibility. The guards may have been so sadistic because they did not feel what happened was down to them personally. It was a group norm. They, they also may have lost their sense of personal identity because of the uniform they wore. Also, learned helplessness could explain the prisoners' submission to the guards. The prisoners learned that whatever they did have little effect on what happened to them. Sorry, the prisoners learned that whatever they did had little effect on what happened to them. In the mock prison, the unpredictable decisions of the guards led the prisoners to give up responding. After the prison experiment was terminated, Zimbardo interviewed the participants. Here's an excerpt. Most of the participants said they felt involved and committed. The research had felt real to them. One guard said, "I was surprised at myself. I made them call each other's names and clean the toilets out with their bare hands. I practically considered the prisoners cattle, and I kept thinking I had to watch out for them in case they tried something." Another guard said, "Acting authoritatively can be fun. Power can be a great pleasure." And another, "During the inspection, I went to cell 2 to mess up a bed which a prisoner had just made, and he grabbed me, screaming that he had just made it, and he was not going to let me mess it up. He grabbed me by the throat, and although he was laughing, I was pretty scared. I lashed out with my stick and hit him on the chin, although not very hard, and when I freed myself, I became angry." Most of the guards found it difficult to believe that they had behaved in such brutalizing ways that they had. Many said they hadn't known this side of them existed, or that they were capable of such things. The prisoners, too, couldn't believe that they had responded in the submissive, cowering, dependent way they had. Several claimed to be assertive types normally. When asked about the guards, they described the usual 3 stereotypes that can be found in any prison. Some guards were good, some were tough but fair, and some were cruel. Critical evaluation. Demand characteristics could explain the findings of the study. Most of the guards later claimed that they were simply acting. Because the guards and prisoners were playing a role, their behavior may not be influenced by the same factors which affect behavior in real life. This means the study's findings cannot be reasonably generalized to real life, such as prison settings, i.e., the study has low ecological validity. However, there is some considerable evidence that the participants did react to the situation as though it was real. For example, 90% of the prisoners' private conversations, which were monitored by the researchers, were on the prison conditions, and only 10% of the time were their conversations about life outside of the prison. The guards, too, rarely exchanged personal information during their relaxation breaks. They either talked about problem prisoners, other prison topics, or did not talk at all. The guards were always on time and even worked overtime for no extra pay. When the prisoners were introduced to a priest, they referred to themselves by their prison number rather than their first name. Some even asked him to get a lawyer to help them get out. The study may also lack population validity as the sample comprised U.S. male students. The study's findings cannot be applied to female prisoners or those from other countries. For example, America is an individualist culture, where people are genuinely less conforming, and the results may be different in collectivist cultures, such as Asian countries. A strength of the study is that it has altered the way the U.S. prisons are run. For example, juveniles accused of federal crimes are no longer housed before trial with adult prisoners due to risk of violence against them. Another strength of the study is that the harmful treatment of participant led to the formal recognition of ethical guidelines by the American Psychological Association. Studies must now undergo an extensive review by an institutional review board or ethics committee before they are implemented. A review of research plans by a panel is required by most institutions such as universities, hospitals, and government agencies. These boards review whether the potential benefits of the research are justifiable in the light of the potential risk of physical or psychological harm. These boards may request researchers make changes to the study's design or procedure, or in extreme cases, deny approval of the study altogether. Go ahead and pause and answer the question about the conclusion section now. All right, and moving on to the last and final section, ethical issues. The study has received many ethical criticisms, including lack of fully informed consent by participants, as Zimbardo himself did not know what would happen in the experiment. It was unpredictable. Also, the prisoners did not consent to being arrested at home. The prisoners were not told, partly because final approval from the police wasn't given until minutes before participants decided to participate, and partly because the researchers wanted the arrests to come as a surprise. However, this was a breach of the ethics of Zimbardo's own contract that all the participants had signed. Participants playing the role of prisoners were not protected from psychological harm, experiencing incidents of humiliation and distress. For example, one prisoner had to be released after 36 hours because of uncontrollable bursts of screaming, crying, and anger. However, in Zimbardo's defense, the emotional distress experienced by the prisoners could not have been predicted from the outset. Approval for the study was given by the Office of Naval Research and Psychology Department, the Psychology Department, and the University Committee of Human Experimentation. This committee also did not anticipate the prisoners' extreme reactions that were to follow. Alternative methodologies were looked at which would cause less distress to the participants, but at the same time give the desired information, but nothing suitable could be found. Extensive group and individual debriefing sessions were held, and all participants returned post-experimental questionnaires over several weeks, then several months later, then at yearly intervals. Zimbardo concluded that there were no lasting negative effects. Zimbardo also strongly argues that the benefits gained from about our understanding of human behavior and how we can improve society should outbalance the distress caused by the study. However, it has been suggested that the U.S. Navy was not so much interested in making prisons more human and were, in fact, more interested in using the study to train people in the armed services to cope with the stresses of captivity. All right, go ahead and at this point, answer the last question from the conclusion section and answer the rest of the questions of the lesson. Don't forget when you're done to also be sure to post your exit ticket answer to the discussion board. And once you do that and comment on some other people's posts, you can finish up the lesson quiz and turn it on in. Thank you for coming with me. Can't believe this is real. This sounds like a creepypasta, to be totally honest. But yeah, psychology. It's kind of fascinating and scary at the same time.